Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pickle. My name is Juan Francisco Muñoz and as always I'm joined by my colleague Ronan Wordsworth. How are you doing, Ronan?
Very good, thank you. Back now from Australia, which was a good trip. Actually enjoying some sunshine, some warmth, coming back to -5 in Prague. But no, it's been great. And I must say, I am very happy to be coming back because we've not had as many episodes as I'd like to have in the last 6 months. And my God, there's a lot to talk about in the world of geopolitics. So we've got a lot to catch up on.
Indeed, actually. Well, it's 21st of January when we are recording this. I think we can have a brief. Do you have any comments on Mark Carney's presentation, sort of, in the Davos forum? Because
I said we're coming to you from 21st of January, and yesterday Mark Carney made his it's got a lot of traction in this speech, and I think to me it is what I think I've been calling out for a while, which is some sort of resistance potentially to this bullying approach of the US under Trump towards its allies. And we see Canada, obviously due to their proximity and their reliance on the US, actually try and take a stand now, draw a line in the sand and say, we actually think the old world is gone. We're not back to that regardless of who's in power in the White House in the future. We need to adapt to this new world order. And to do that as a middle power, we need to have allies. It doesn't make sense to build up walls, even though that is the natural inclination of different countries. I think that message really resonates with me. I think if we look at Europe as individual countries and as a whole as well, look at the UK, we look at Australia, we've got these countries which on their own are in no way capable of competing with the United States or China. However, collectively, they are able to present a much more powerful bloc and force. So I think this is something that we will see increasingly throughout the year. It also goes into what Carney talked about, just signed an agreement with China last week to allow tariff-free access to the Canadian market for almost 50,000 EVs per year. I think that's also related to it, saying, okay, we're going to not just rely on the US anymore. We need to diversify away. And I think this is kind of a line in the sand. I think we'll look back in years from now and say this was a defining moment in the shift of global response to Trump. And I think it's really interesting from there.
some really interesting speech. Well, we've talked about it on WhatsApp. But it is really interesting because of how close Canada is to as an ally to the United States, and the current situation with Greenland makes it all the most important. I would like to highlight one other development, a bit more in a positive tone, and also giving way to today's topic, which is that the European Union has finally agreed, at least in the at the heads of state level, they've passed a resolution to approve the EU-Mercosur agreement, which has been under talks for 25 years. And I think it's key for the survival of both the European Union and Mercosur in this upcoming multipolar world. For the European Union, it means if there's still some steps on the way, no, you still have to pass it in the European Parliament. Now, I read today that they've also raised some legal concerns about it. And then after going through all of this, it will have to go through the European Union members' parliaments, individual parliaments. So there's still some long way, but it's definitely, or at least I hope that it is the beginning of some more pragmatic approach of the European Union, diversifying their sources of raw materials, accessing new markets with technology, and also having a reliable and a reliable ally in order to achieve food security, energy security, our green transition, etc. So I think it's something good that hopefully in the near future, we can see some more developments.
It's just a quick Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and how you're going, and to our audience, because I haven't been around for a little while. How was your winter break here?
I mean, you were enjoying the sun, we were enjoying the cold. I'm a southerner, I'm not used to the snow, and it snowed a lot in Prague. I think more than any other year before, actually. And so I've spent Christmas in Slovakia, so I've learned a few Christmas traditions. It's been interesting. It's been long. It's still long. It's still too cold for me. Still, I wake up and I feel like I should be hibernating. Like, yes, it's no. I need to move somewhere warmer eventually. I think with this, if you don't mind, Ronan, let's introduce the topic of today. So, from El Chaco to La Pampa and crossing the Colorado and Negro rivers and then getting into Patagonia, Tierra de Fuego, and even Antarctica, Argentina is the 7th largest country in the world and one of the regional leaders. For centuries, the country has been at the center of global trade. Not without reason, the Spanish named the river that saw the birth of Buenos Aires Río de la Plata, or River of Silver in English. And today, the country is an absolute leader in agriculture and mining production and exports such as beef, soy products, lithium, and football, although it has a shaky geopolitical stand. And today, to speak about Argentina, we are really lucky to bring an Argentinian to our podcast, our former colleague and geopolitical analyst, Facundo Argüello.
Good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are. It's minus 15 Celsius here in Boston. That's what the locals call it, Boston, not Boston. And I am so very happy and honored to be here with you guys.
It is really a pleasure to have you, Facundo. We've been thinking about having this episode for 3 years and a half. Actually, this is the 4th year of life of the Geopolitical. We started in 2022. And I think since the very first day, I told you, man, we need to do an episode about Latin America or Argentina, and we need to bring you here. So really sorry for taking this long, but really happy that you're here.
Yes, I mean, I like to look at the glass half full. So yeah, lovely to be here.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate what Juan said and then jump into today's episode. And first of all, I just wanted to go through some of the history around Argentina. Obviously, right now, it's a lot of headlines with President Javier Milei. But I want to understand some of like the period under Spanish Empire through to the dictatorships, and then the rise of Peronism, which I know you've explained previously in different chats that we're in, and given me a really good understanding of how that kind of led to the rise of Javier Milei, a really anti-establishment figure. So I don't know if you want to start way back and give us a bit of background.
So Buenos Aires is founded during the 16th century as a way for Spain to claim coastal enclaves around Latin America. It was mostly a plant the flag and see what happens thing, and to gain access to Paraguay, where the Jesuits had their Guarani missions, where they would evangelize the Indians over there and try to incorporate them into colonial society. Later, shortly after, massive deposits of silver were found in Bolivia. This means that Buenos Aires suddenly became very convenient for mining the silver, taking it by land from Bolivia all the way to Buenos Aires and exporting it through the river. Actually, the name of the river in English officially is River Plate, not River Silver, which makes perfect sense the way you said it. In fact, our second biggest soccer team, or first, depending on how you lean, is called River Plate. That was the state of affairs for, I would say, a few centuries. There was not a lot of going on in Buenos Aires. It was just the end of a land highway that went from Bolivia to the city. Then Patagonia was completely Indian territory, as well as La Pampa, which is the center of the country, and the Northeast, which is jungle, was again Native American land. However, in the 18th century, as the Bourbon monarchies begin to reform the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese in Brazil begin to expand, ignoring the limits of the Tordesillas Treaty that separated the Portuguese and Spanish areas of influence. Therefore, Buenos Aires became a good staging area to try to slow down or stop Portuguese expansion. There were even some at the second half of the 18th century, some wars that were around the area of with a modern frontier between the two countries. Buenos Aires was also crucial because of the Magellan Strait and the southern tip of the country, the second strait that allows navigation between Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, notwithstanding the still non-existing Panama Canal. While it was still, like I said, Native American territory, Buenos Aires was the last port that you could reasonably use before doing the long haul to the south. Now, on the 19th century, things begin to change. At the very beginning, during the Napoleonic Wars, the British see the geostrategic potential of the city, but also as, again, the recipient of silver. So in 1806, they adopt a policy of attacking Bourbon allied colonies. So Martinique, for example, St. Louis, or Buenos Aires. In fact, the expedition was not even allowed by Parliament. They managed to capture the city for a bit, try to turn it into a British commercial enclave, but they got kicked out by the local army and militias. A year before, they even captured the treasure fleet going from Buenos Aires to Madrid without declaring war, because the treasure fleet was going to be used to finance Spain's war against England. The British knew this in advance, so they captured the fleet. It was a bit of a scandal back then. Now, after that, Argentina becomes independent as in 1816, and then we fall into a bit of a civil war that lasts some, I would say, 40 years of ebb and flow. There's many years of no fighting, but essentially the country is disintegrated into warlord territories. Buenos Aires is the only one that prospers, being the only port city that manages to become very cosmopolitan and pretty much ignores the rest of the country, which was much more backwards economically. It even begins developing a more secular life, which was unthinkable in the rest of the country. Now, once the country is fully unified in 1862, it begins a rapid socioeconomic development. Immigration is very strongly encouraged from Europe. There was this very 19th century idea of bringing the best of the best from Europe. And what happened was that we usually got people who were unemployed or were running from the law, and also many hardworking immigrants. But the ideal was not so, and most of the people did not move into the inner country. They all stayed around Buenos Aires, with the exception of Italian colonists that settled northwest of Buenos Aires and developed the cereal economy. We already had plenty of pasture, plenty of meat production, mostly for leathers, and even dried salted meat for feeding slaves in Brazilian and American plantations. But after that, Argentina rapidly becomes what was colloquially known as the food bank of the world, more or less. The world's meal, depends on the translation. Now, this begins to change after the world economic crisis. It was already slowing down, But after the 1930s, degree of industrialization begins to happen. There is an understanding that being solely a primary agricultural exporter nation is not going to be enough in the long haul, especially seeing how the US began in a similar way. And well, it's the US. That's when, for a couple, it's a very complicated story, but that's when Peronism arrives. Juan Perón. If you have heard of Evita, you know her husband was Juan Perón. Juan Perón was a colonel in the army and extremely well educated, very sharp and very ruthless. He sits kind of like some leaders at the time, some place between fascism and democracy, not belonging clearly to either camp. His main stand was the unions and workers' rights. There were incredible developments in that regard. And he pretty much always sided with the unions, which became his bulwark. He nationalized the oil fields that were becoming more and more relevant back then. And eventually, his economic reform, because he was so statist, began running out of steam. And he began accumulating enemies, including he chose to antagonize with the Catholic Church, despite being very close on his first term, to the point that the Catholic elements in the army, with some connivance from the Argentine Catholic Church, enacted a coup. Perón barely escaped with his life. I'm talking about by the skin of his teeth, in a single boat into the river, and escaped to Franco's Spain. He was there for 20 years, a bit less, like 18 years. From then on, Argentina is under dictatorship, and or what you would say to be controlled elections, where Peronism is banned. In fact, saying the word Perón can land you into jail. Saying the word Evita can land you into jail. He returns in 1972, if I remember correctly, because the military, after many coups, are losing control of the political sentiment in the country. He doesn't do so well. He dies a year after. Then his second wife begins a term. She was the vice president, kind of like House of Cards, if you're into that. She is very easy to manipulate by the state services, and they begin a campaign of state terror. I'm talking about killings on the streets, state executions, kidnappings. And she has such a problem with Marxist guerrillas, who used to be Peronist, and now they are against Perón, that the military take over and begin what was called the dirty war in the US. And we call it the process, because the official name was state reorganization process. That is a campaign of state terror like nothing we had before. The unofficial, most commonly cited numbers are 30,000 people tortured and killed. That includes my uncle, by the way. And we found his body in 2014 in a mass grave. So it's something very present in our lives. After that, we have the Falkland War. The Falklands were annexed in 1833 by the UK. Argentina had never stopped requesting some sort of shared tutelage over the islands. But the government at the time, the military, were kind of losing legitimacy. So they decided to do something to shake things up and rally around the flag, which is exactly what the Margaret Thatcher administration needed. She could not have asked for something better. And it didn't go well for Argentina. We lost the war decisively. And after that, the military junta quickly lost all power and credibility, and they were out of power. Then we got an anti-Peronist administration, democratic one. And finally, we entered the 1990s with the government of Menem. Menem is a very important character in Argentine history, in geopolitical history, because he's the first one that affirms Argentina is no longer the state power it was 70 years ago. We are clearly now followers instead of leaders, and he automatically aligns the country following Brazil and the US. Whereas before that, Peronism and even some military administrations were more ambivalent, more trying to play a third position, which was a principle of Peronism, between East and West. This comes with some good and bad results. For example, Menem liberalizes commerce, imports, which pretty much annihilates the Argentine domestic industry, but stabilizes the economy. We were having a tremendous amount of inflation. I'm talking about 20,000%. Because of mismanagement from the previous democratic and military administrations. Now, to make this long story short, in 2003, there's a new player called the Kirchners, Nestor Kirchner and his wife, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. Now, the Kirchners claim to be Peronist, but while having many of the attributes, they do another turn. Argentina suddenly is no longer oriented to the US and the former USSR, but now it's going to become Latin American. Peronism was not particularly Latin American. It was very pragmatic. It was, we should be related with Latin America if it's good for us. The Kirchners make it a principle. It has to happen. And that means that they snub the US on many occasions. There's a lot of distancing compared to what Menem had achieved in the 90s. The economy stabilized. We actually have the boom of the prices of soybean products. So the country is on the mend. The cycle expires and the more authoritarian populist government runs out of steam. They exhibited many traits that you would find today in right-wing authoritarian governments, like censorship of the press or state ownership of, or at least capture of mass media. And then we begin a dance between right-wing and Kirchner-aligned administrations, going to leaning the country towards the US and towards China and to the US again. That's where we are now. So I would say that is a very, very quick history of Argentina, with Milei now as president.
I will have the first question, Facundo, because it's always called my attention. You've mentioned that that Perón's government was characterized for being pragmatic,
yes,
in the global scene. However, it is usually ascribed to more leftist-leaning ideologies within its context. However, as you correctly mentioned, Perón goes on exile to Franco Spain, which is a right-wing Catholic dictatorship. How is that understanding of Argentina, or even the leadership of Argentina, internally and externally? Because maybe the perception of left and right that we have is not the same applicable down there?
It is the same. The thing is, before the Kirchners in 2003, no one would have said that Peronism was left-wing, with the exception of the Peronist guerrillas. Perón was very adept at having many wings in Peronism as a political movement that he would activate and deactivate from Spain to try to destabilize and reinforce his political presence in Argentina from afar. He would activate the unions, then deactivate them. He would go try to play the democratic game. Then the guerrillas would activate it afterwards to apply pressure. So that was the Peronist left wing, which was annihilated during the Dirty War, the process. Peron was very openly an admirer of Benito Mussolini. He was very, very right wing. He had a lot of appreciation for the Spanish imperial project. He had read much about it and used to quote it in his writings and speeches and like private talks. However, he was not really Catholic. He had no trouble, no issue throwing the Catholic Church under the bus if it didn't suit him. The Kirchnerists in 2003 decide to use the label of Peronism, do some of the things that Peronism did, but give it a very left-wing turn. In 2008, more or less 2009, they also decide to become progressive, not just left-wing in a more workers' rights and state intervention sense, but they, for example, legalize gay marriage when many senators and congressmen, and even the president herself, was personally against it because they knew that it would win them elections, which it did. It was a correct calculation. Then inevitably Peronism became associated with a very progressive left. But no, it didn't used to be the case in the 20th century. Yes, the Communist Party used to be very much against Peronism.
So Facundo, we've spoken about this historical development of Argentina, but now we have President Javier Milei, who's taking a clear stand in the geopolitical sphere. But can you please explain us right now what are Argentina's biggest allies?
Of course, the Argentine biggest allies depend on who is in charge. There's been a lot of ideologically driven realignments in the past few presidencies. Some of it is because of how polarized Argentina is, but some of it is because everyone in the region is doing the same. If your neighbor Bolsonaro is willing to put everything on the line because of ideological preferences, you have to do the same. Now, right now, as you said correctly, Milei is very much aligned with the US to a degree that we have not seen in many, many years. Even President Macri, who was personal friends with Donald Trump, was less aligned than this. However, the alignment is intense, but the overlap is not quite so. Milei is all for reversing progressive policies and denying climate change and even vaccines. But for example, he disagrees in theory, but he does not speak about this in public with Trump's economic policies. He is against state intervention. He is against taxes. He is against tariffs and foreign wars, though he did applaud the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, again on ideological standings. So right now, things are closer to the US, but also the UK. It doesn't mean that it has not been profitable for him in some regards. For example, Argentina got the green light to import F-16 fighters from the US. That is a huge thing in a country that barely has any air force to speak of. The only planes we had left were transports and training jets. That was a process that could not have been possible without first the US willing to sell them, but also the UK typically has a veto on the sales of armaments to Argentina since the Falkland War. This has hobbled our war industry, which we do have a little bit of, all this time, all these 40 years. So it comes with the good and the bad. Argentina, for example, is now a close ally of Israel because President Milei, while nominally Catholic, identifies as Jewish. One of his top advisors is a rabbi. And this means that Argentina now is getting distancing itself from the entire Arab world in exchange for very little, frankly. It does not net us significant benefits on any stage except for the president's personal sympathies. So that's where we stand.
And then just building on that, I mean, I understand that the Argentinian economic situation when Milei took over was kind of very dire, where you looked at huge debts, foreign arrears, lack of hard currency. And obviously the US has assisted with that, I think, first with the extension of a $20 billion credit and then a follow-up announcement of a potentially another $20 billion credit, totaling $40 billion. And I guess that also helps to be able to purchase these new armaments and military equipment and hardware, but also to stabilize the economy. And how was that played out as part of the alignment with the US? And then secondarily, do you think that actually has a huge effect on Argentina's ability to act independently when looking at geopolitically, strategically, how closely? Because to me as an outsider, it looks like at the moment they're very much tied to the US. As you said, Milei might disagree with a lot of what Trump's positions are, but he won't necessarily ever say that, or Argentina won't take a contrary position. And it appears to be related to some of this financial backing and requirement for the government there to stabilize the economy.
At the same time, in Argentina, the expectation is things will spiral out of control at any time, more or less every 10 years. The Argentine peso, or national currency, has been mauled to death so many times that Argentines now, by instinct, try to run away from it, either by not saving or by investing in more fungible assets, including foreign currency. Argentines, if they could get money out of the country, which they cannot, it's one of the most financially isolated countries in the world, the country would run out of any currency probably on the first day. They know that the next disaster is around the corner, so the expectations inform their decisions. They always try to buy dollars and euros as well, but chiefly dollars. There's some psychological fixation with it. It's a safe bet, but also, even when it's not, they still do it because anything but pesos. This means that if the expectations of a disaster rise, people try to buy more, which means that the treasury begins to run out of dollars and it needs to service its own debt. So you can see how that can spiral out of control, which is what has happened many times. The worst time was probably 2001, when the government froze all bank withdrawals, and 2023, when the government ran out of dollars, the treasury was in the red, and inflation rose to 250%. Part of the alignment of Milei with the US is to try to get a close ally in the IMF for debt refinancing, but also to try to calm the local markets. I cannot emphasize how fragile the national trust in the government's ability to keep the finances together is, especially since during Kirchnerism, the central bank gave its independence away, similar to what is the struggle of power that's happening right now in the US. So that is more or less why Milei thinks that alignment is necessary. He also has a personal aversion for China and dictatorships, though he had to change his tune very quickly at the beginning of his government because he was so ideologically driven. He began doing threatening gestures to China, such as even recognizing Taiwan. And China said then, very well, if you do that, we'll stop buying anything from you, which would have meant financial collapse, immediate and complete. So now Milei's Congress people give exemptions to Huawei and other Chinese companies and the ICBC, and they play game while still paying lip service to the US. Did that answer your question, or did I miss something?
No, I think that answered all of what that essence was. But then from there, I want to kind of situate Argentina in a larger Latin American picture, because the way I understand it, I mean, I'm not an expert in Latin American geopolitics at all. We look now, there's kind of two distinctive blocks, right? And this right-wing conservative free market capitalist style of Milei is growing amongst the bloc. We look at Chile, just had elections last year, Ecuador, and a few others. And then we see this other counter bloc, which I guess is the more left-leaning socialist groups. We've got Venezuela, we've got Brazil, even though potentially Venezuela is more a faux socialist country under Maduro, but there's two kind of really distinctive blocks. Do you see this Argentina taking this leading position? Because for me, I think they're the most distinctive position of this right-wing movement that is actually growing across all of Latin America.
So what you say is correct. There's a lot of, the Reich is now very different than what it was 10 years ago, in large part informed by the US because of the US cultural hegemony over Latin America. Basically, at least in Argentina, we pretty much do whatever the US has in vogue. When the US began the cultural wars, we began the cultural wars, even when things didn't translate as neatly because there was a different sociopolitical reality. Right now, we have a pendular movement between right and left. If I'm being honest, I would say the left, the Latin American left began radicalizing, and then the right radicalized in turn as a reaction. And I think they took it much further, but that is debatable. That depends on who you ask. The right of 10 years ago had antipathy for the left, but not this level of aversion. This is something very new. Lula and Milei, Lula from Brazil, Milei Argentina, despise each other to the degree that they're willing to cease collaboration on many matters, including negotiations with the EU over the Mercosur. And the problem is that because nobody is able to improve the economy, which is, of course, the mother of all battles, to a satisfactory degree, and because of corruption and inefficiency, winning an election is a very fickle thing, much more so in countries like Peru that have such a degree of turnout. The problem is that lack of union and coherence at any level undermines the bloc's position towards external actors, be it the US or China or whatever. For example, Milei is perfectly willing to sacrifice a good deal with China just because the US asks for it, and vice versa. I think Venezuela, for example, shot itself in the foot with nationalizing American oil wells just for ideological leanings. And there are many examples of this all over the bloc. I think in that context, Milei has, it's difficult to picture clearly how popular Milei is in Latin America, how popular his style and the things he says and the things he does are among the Latin American right wing, because he's able to group together, not unlike the MAGA movement in America, conservatives and libertarians. He's able to have religious pastors rooting for him, but also the corporate world. It's a coalition that has a lot of internal issues, but right now it's a winning machine. Milei just won his midterms by a landslide, despite infighting, despite his sister having been caught red-handed taking bribes, despite himself promoting a crypto scam that was an instant disaster, despite one of his congressmen being outed as being in the pocket of narcos. With overwhelming evidence, he still won by a landslide. It goes to show you that I think the leftist populist cycle has run out of a narrative. You can only blame the US, as it used to be the case during Kirchnerism, for everything for so long, until you've been in power for 12 years and the people are just as poor as when you began. People get tired of that. And people get tired of inflation rising, but it's the fault of the empire. The empire in Latin America is always the US from the left. If I say the empire in any part of Latin America, everyone will understand without any need of clarification that you mean the US. Nobody buys it anymore. So when this guy says, I'm going to destroy everything, despite all the problems that he has and all the mistakes he's done, it's still popular. And not all has been defeats and mistakes. He's tamed inflation in Argentina, reduced it by 90%. That was incredible. I've never seen it in my life as an Argentine. He managed to stabilize not just the finances, but the economy in general. He managed to stop the social unrest. The left had painted itself into a corner where any sort of police repression was seen as authoritarian and sign of the right, that it could not deal with its own unrest. So you could have in the main avenues of Buenos Aires 5 people blocking an entire avenue of like 10 lanes, and the political order would be do not have them go away. And Milei comes and says, we're going to give our cops guns and have them clear the streets immediately. And that was, I cannot emphasize how popular that was.
Notice the similarities there between that messaging in Argentina and the messages that resonated in the US in the lead up to the election.
Well, we haven't had the intensity of the US, especially with recent developments, and we don't have interestingly, we do not have the same attitude towards immigrants. We have plenty of illegal immigration, and it's not a matter of political strife between right and left. The right is more keen on maybe blocking immigrants from accessing certain benefits or having free education. University in Argentina is optionally free, same as healthcare, but it's not the lightning rod that it is in the US. But yes, the administration is perfectly willing to side with the police, even in the cases where the use of force by the police has been very clearly unconstitutional. Even you don't have to be a lawyer to see that some of the things that have been done are bad, and the administration will back them, and so will society, because he got 50% of the vote in the midterms. Who gets 50% of the vote on midterms?
And I want to go a little bit on the regional aspect of it, because I always had the belief when analyzing Latin American politics that when the waves of color, as I wrote in one article, I don't know the right word for it, but when the waves of right-wing governments in Latin America were happening, in Argentina it was technically left. When the movement of left-wing governments in Latin America are happening, in Argentina it's on the right. But then, for example, I remember before Chávez dies, in Argentina is Nestor, I believe. He's ruling at the time. Before Chávez dies. Hugo Chávez.
Oh, for Chávez, yes. It was more or less concurrent, but yes, Nestor was a bit before that.
Okay, so what I had the perspective was that both the left and the right in Argentina, they are unique in a way. They were not the closest allies of the leftist movements in Latin America when there's leftist movement, when there's leftist governments, and when there's right-wing governments, as it is now with Milei, it's beyond the expectations of the right-wing governments of the region. It's beyond, like it brings neoliberalism beyond. Is there a political culture in Argentina that you would say is makes it different from the rest of Latin America, or would you say it's closer to Latin America than I don't know, global Western left-right?
There are differences. For example, we don't have a peasant population like Brazil or Bolivia has. So we never really had a peasant movements like the Sin Terra in Brazil or the coca farmers in Bolivia. So it's usually more around unions and workers' rights. The problem is that the definition of left in Argentina is a bit muddled. The Communist parties, for example, despise the Kirchnerists. They just despise the right more. But when there's no elections, they were on a warpath always against them and doing protests and such. What Kirchnerism got very right was that when being left-wing was popular from 2008 to 2018, if you will, they said they were left, even if a lot of what they did was not necessarily left-wing, not necessarily right-wing either, but for example, very statist or very, in some degrees, even repressive. We had the intelligence agency conducting espionage of local journalists. Cristina Kirchner would meet with U.S. fleet admirals and in very cordial relations, and then talk badly about the U.S. the very same day. She was able to gain such a degree of credibility that that the right criticizes, but the right wishes they had, such as talking about sovereignty, but then installing a Chinese satellite military base in Argentina for 99 years. They would talk about autonomy, but then they would make secret deals with Iran or Venezuela that were not beneficial to the country. They take it to the extreme, both sides, I would say, and the right is not innocent in that either. Whatever the US does, we seem to be doing on more, and mostly, if you ask me, on discourse and symbols. And that's been a thing in the past as well. During the process, the dictatorship, our government was so murderous against local communists that the US had to ask us to stop. And our government, our dictatorship said, you are not anti-communist enough. In the 90s, we were so pro-America, on the other hand, that the relations were called carnal relations because it was considered to be sexual, and not in a way that benefits Argentina, if I may take the metaphor a bit further away. So it does have a lot of symbolism and gotcha and enmity aspect, the ideological pendular movement in Argentina. There are many politicians that I happen to know who will speak very much in favor of progressive policies, but they will kick their gay son out of the home without breaking stride. There are many who will talk about personal liberties, but in their provinces they act as tyrants because they have such credibility, and Argentine political education leaves a lot to be desired.
So I think it goes as you say that it brings it to the extremes. Is it more extreme that River versus Boca Junior in the street, or are we talking something a bit more mild?
In Argentina, you might be able to marry or date someone from the opposing soccer team. Our dating apps, most of them clearly specify their political leaning because they don't want anything to do with people of the other side. And I've seen that as someone who a long time ago used to use them for decades now. Many friendships are no longer, many family ties are no longer because of how deeply the political divide is. Even when the other team does good things, there's absolutely no recognition of any, no majesty around it, of recognizing that someone else can do good things. Yeah.
Which I'd say, again, looking to the north of you is a prime example of how damaging that can be when you have this political polarization and you can't actually have any sort of common ground between different parties. I think it ends up in a very dangerous space. And I think you've explained well as well how it's caused this pendulum to swing back and forth really dramatically and to extremes.
Let me give you an example. The EU Mercosur agreement. The negotiation took 25 years, like Juanfrey said. In 2019, Bolsonaro and Macri, both right-wing and pro-US, agree to lower, to make concessions to the EU in exchange for nothing, just to advance the process. For example, they agree not to demand that the EU lower its own subsidies to farmers, or they agree to enforce EU intellectual property in our country. So, for example, we have plenty of French products such as champagne or Roquefort cheese, blue cheese in America, that was labeled as such. And with the concessions that Macri and Bolsonaro made, we would have to abandon those names. They clearly were not willing to see the two blocs as equals. Even if they are not, you can't just give up the fight just like that in exchange for nothing. The following left-wing administrations, Fernandez in Argentina and Lula in Brazil, thank you, managed to row back some of these concessions, and now Milei has said, okay, that's enough. Whatever else you were negotiating, it's enough. I want the agreement, and I want it now, because he's all for free trade, which means that, again, we gave up the last of our objections in exchange for expediency. And since 2019, when the first concessions were given, the EU said, we cannot change this agreement because it benefits the EU. However, they kept adding conditions themselves, which shows how a unified, strong position can trump over pendular foreign policy. So the agreement is good, but it could have been so much better for Latin America, for the Mercosur.
Since it's all the four countries.
It also gives a bit of a window into Milei's mindset as a politician and this pragmatism that you alluded to before, because as I said, it's been going on for 25 years. From my perspective, at some point it needs to get across the line, or there's no point continuing the negotiations.
Exactly.
And if you're not going to get any concessions, and maybe that's the way forward. And at the same time, he's a fervent believer in free trade, but he's Trump's main ally in Latin America, and we all know what Trump thinks of free trade as well. So I think, I guess, even if you don't like the guy, you have to admire his pragmatism on some of these aspects and ability to try and get some sort of resolution to these outcomes.
Yes, Milei is very. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something else?
I was going to move quickly to another topic, kind of related to that level of pragmatism. I think because I think what a lot of people understand from Latin America is being the central hub of global drug trade, especially cocaine, and that's kind of been brought to the fore again in the last 12 months as well, following U.S. actions against drug vessels in the Caribbean, predominantly from Venezuela, shipping boats. But I think if we look, Colombia is the leading producer of cocaine, Ecuador, and I don't know about Argentina in terms of production, but I think it's also had its own issues because of the money that comes from the drug trade and these armed, violent non-state actors that then exist in the territory. And so how is that kind of played out both within Argentina and then regionally, as well as the US response? What is the general feeling about taking out the means, whether legal or otherwise, of taking out these boats? It still could be quite popular, I imagine.
So the Milei crowd is very much in favor of bombing the boats, and they're probably wondering, why can't we do the same? Argentina didn't used to have cartels, but in 2008, the government of Calderon in Mexico began restricting precursor chemicals because of the production of synthetic drugs. Therefore, the Sinaloa cartel established a base in Argentina. Rumor has it that they funded Cristina Kirchner's election in exchange for precursor imports. Their precursor imports rose by, I think, 1,000%, unexplainably. From then on, Argentina has cartels. They mostly do synthetic drugs and Bolivian cocaine that goes to Europe. I think mostly to Rotterdam. Right now, Milei has taken a very anti-organized crime approach. I've spoken with people who are in law enforcement, and they said that while an aspect of that is true, there's also deals with gangs and cartels to lower the temperature, similar to what is rumored about what's going on in Salvador with the Maras. There's been real results, but some of it appears to be politically arranged, so they can claim victory. Some people are living safer. There's a city in Argentina called Rosario that has a level of drug-related homicides that is in a different scale and magnitude than the rest of the country combined. Milei sent the militarized police, and there's no more murders. How are people not going to celebrate that, even if there may be a cynical pact behind that? It's understandable. The problem is that the drug issue problem in Argentina, like everything else, like everywhere else, is political. There are powerful actors who everyone knows who they are, who are untouchable, and the Milei administration, like other right-wing administrations before, focuses on the territory, the ground, the neighborhoods, instead of going for the big fish, because the big fish are scary.
Yeah, so that is also following a bit the continent's response as well, because I mean, there are Argentina. I don't know if you know this, Ronan. I'm definitely not going to discover anything to Facundo, but there is this triple border that is between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. That it's so far away from the centers of power of each country. It's in the middle of the jungle with two rivers crossing. it's really difficult to actually maintain order there and control everything, even if you wanted to do it, because there is also talks that the Paraguayan government doesn't really do much to stop the trafficking through there, because it's mostly in Paraguay, but it's literally it's the three countries border, and there's all sorts of mafia reportedly being there, like from Lebanese to Chinese to Russian to Colombian. So um, it is clearly, I don't know how in deep could it be with the government in itself, and so I mean we have clear cases in Latin America that may be probably worse than that, but definitely I would say, I don't know if you would agree, Facundo, that it's also a problem of the we cannot picture really how big Argentina is, or how big Brazil is, or how big Paraguay is, and how thin can the state be in certain aspects of its own security.
Yes. So the tri-border, it does not really deal with drugs. It's mostly about smuggling of goods and women, human trafficking. There's a lot of human trafficking going on there. Like you said, Paraguay is often accused of not doing much about it. I heard a couple of years ago that you can buy an AK-47 for $50. That border is very porous. All that those rivers, like you can see the other end of the river and can cross by paddling in 5 minutes, and you'll see one prefecture coast guard, if you will, boat like maybe twice a day. And in the meantime, there are, for example, international bridges with Bolivia, that the river is so shallow that the smugglers all cross next to the bridge by wading into the river in view of the military police, with big packages on their heads filled with smuggled goods, probably including drugs. It's very difficult to enforce. It's a huge problem we have. The same happens in our sea. Our coastline is 7,000 kilometers, 11,000 if you count Antarctica. And we have a huge problem with mostly Chinese fleets that are sitting just outside of our exclusive economic zone. They either enter quickly and steal our fish, or they use giant floodlights that you can see by satellite if you Google right now, to lure the fish outside. This catch is several times larger than our entire national catch combined. We have no way to enforce it. It's too much of a border, too few border patrol. And what are you going to do? You are going to sink ships. If you try to board them, they'll go outside of into international waters, where there are tankers there that have to refuel, store, supermarkets, freezers, like giant ships that are giant freezers for catch. It's a problem in all of Latin America, not just Venezuelan and Colombian border. Yeah.
I was going to say, I know we have never talked about it really before on the Geopolitical Pickle, but it's not even unique to Latin America. I know it happens all across African coasts as well. And this idea about how valuable and how important resource the fisheries and your coastline and EEZ is. And a lot of the weaker states don't have the capacity to actually defend that against potential larger states coming in and, as we said, ravaging the oceans and plundering basically what are your natural resources, and then affecting the sustainability long term as well.
I mean, that's literally the reason why the pirates in Somalia appeared, or why now there's more piracy as well. It's also related with piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. We could do an episode actually on fisheries and impacting local populations, how bigger countries sign deals with smaller countries and they get to fish in their waters, but then the population loses their source of income and resorts to getting a $50 AK-47 and a small boat.
If people are interested in that, they should let us know. Write in or leave a comment and say if you're interested in that as a future episode, or any other topic you might have.
I'm interested in that. Even if they are not interested, I think we're gonna have an episode on it.
Even
Facundo, yeah.
No, even so, many Argentine fishing boats have entirely Chinese crews with one Argentine to fulfill legal requirements to count as an Argentine ship, but it's all Chinese and they sell to the Chinese market. Go on.
This also happens with Chile. If I remember correctly, China basically populates the entire waters of Chile, and there's always and Ecuador as well. Yeah. Facundo, thank you very much. I want to close with one question, which I think is the summary of what we've been doing. So, if you had to choose a football team, no, that's you told me not to make you difficult question. So the question would be then in this current multipolar world that we have and seeing the current alignment of Washington and Buenos Aires, ideological alignment, but at the same time, this push for liberalization of trade, therefore finding partners like the EU or even China, because China is willing to relocate. I know, for example, that the Saudi products that China was getting from the US because of their trade fight, China has been looking for other markets to purchase from, and Brazil and Argentina have been those markets to purchase from. So, where does Argentina stand in the next 4 to 5 years in this global situation?
Well, I have to say I'm optimistic. Not necessarily because I'm a fan of President Milei, but I think his pro-US leanings, coupled with the cold water bath that Chinese warnings became, means that Argentina is more or less in the middle once again, trying to do the best with both sides, even if is more with US. There's a lot of trade going on with China. We have benefited a great deal from the disruption of global trade from mostly the Ukraine war, not so much COVID. Our imports have grown a lot because of that, because of the lack of, for example, Russian grain or the lack of Russian gas. Even it's to the point that we export more than we can actually refine. So we have to sell unrefined gas and oil to Chile for storage, buy it back once it's refined, and then export it again. Milei, for example, is also signing up deals for AI data centers in Patagonia. Patagonia is not very productive beyond cattle, oil, gas, and minerals. It's a very cold and not very agriculturally productive area. So I'm kind of optimistic about the picture that is being painted once all the cards fall where they may. If we have a saying in Argentina, which is, in the cart, the watermelons will find their place. And I think that's what's happening right now. Milei's vociferous attitudes are being tempered by experience and reality. And it could be much better, but it could be so much worse.
Well, then we hope. Yeah. Sorry, Rana.
I was going to say, I think that's a good place to leave it, right? There's a bit of optimism at the end for the current situation and potential for, I know, a reset Argentina and potential for that to expand into the rest of Latin America, especially in this age of multipolarity that we see emerging.
Hope for those watermelons to fall in the right place.
Absolutely. You said it, brother.
Okay, well, Facundo, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Hopefully this won't be the last time. Thank you very much. Ronan, are you happy after 2 months you're recording again? How was it? How did you feel?
It's great to be back, and we'll be bringing you more episodes soon. So stay tuned, subscribe, share with your friends. We need to get the message out there. 2026, as I said, it's a bit late to be saying we're starting the year, but towards the end of January. But I think it's going to be a busy year. So definitely keep peeled.
And now with video.
And now with video. So tune into the Geopolitical Pickle wherever you get your podcast or YouTube. and you'll get the latest episode right to you. So thank you very much for listening.